Hayes-2360 students, we are starting our work in Module 3. So Module 2, you were completing your discussion, and we were looking at choosing a case study child and really looking at the case studies and those profiles and see which child we want to work with. So when we're looking at Module 3, we're actually going to begin our work, the project work, with our case study child now that you've had a chance to review the profiles and you chose your case study child that you want to complete the project work on. So this Module 3 is really looking at the development and really determining what's typical of this disability or delay. And we start off really looking deep into our textbook and looking at what are the risk factors of this disability. We're looking at what may result in developmental delays for a child. So the first two modules really look at the need for monitoring the development of that child, right? So we look at IDEIA, we're looking at Part B and Part C, and how they define and classify these disabilities or exceptionalities. And then in our second lesson, really looking at, in the textbook, a broader grouping, right? So we put them under categories like sensory, physical health, learning and behavioral. So where would that child fall under? And these are the things that I want you to think about as you're going through these lessons and thinking about in the back of your mind your case study child. And it may even help you to have your case study child profile pulled up as you're working through 3.1 and 3.2 lesson. So what you're going to be doing is you have the lessons laid out in here for you under Module 3. So you have 2 weeks to complete it, just like you did the first module that you worked on. So you will do lessons 3.1 and 3.2. You have assigned textbook chapters you will be reading in this module. I have included video links throughout which will help you and just connect more to the content and our focusing questions that we have that you need to be thinking about as you go through these lessons. So what are you going to be assessed on? You're going to be completing the first project work of your case study child. So you will be completing a case study disability PowerPoint. And this is going to be on your chosen child. I have an example that I want to show you that kind of hopefully will let you see the layout, the format, and the expectations of what I want you to do. So when you're completing this PowerPoint, it's really looking at the disability itself, and that's what these two lessons in Module 3 are going to help you do. You want to be able to not only define what that disability is, but look at other factors, right? And we'll go through the expectations of how I want you to kind of lay it out, but also what needs to be included in this PowerPoint. As an educator, it's important for you to have knowledge, right? And to learn all you can about different disabilities. Because if you work in an inclusive early childhood setting, you may have students who have a sensory impairment or they have a learning or behavioral disability. So it's important for you to be knowledgeable about the different kinds. And then also you are going to be taking your Module 3 quiz. So let's go ahead and kind of walk through the overview and then the assignment for the first project work assignment you will be submitting, and then look at an example. So I laid here some focusing questions in this module. I also laid out some objectives of what we hope to accomplish in Module 3. Okay, so the guiding questions, I broke them up for each lesson, and these are the things I want you to think about as you're going through the lesson. For reading, I have the textbook chapters here that I want you to read and be able to familiarize yourself, because these textbook chapters are connected to the Lesson 3.1 and Lesson 3.2. The vocabulary listed here, these are all the vocabulary terms that you're going to be looking at that will contribute to your knowledge base when we're talking about working with young children, their families, other professionals, and looking at the disabilities or exceptionalities. In the textbook, you're going to see a lot of these Also, these terms you're going to see throughout the lesson contents. Maybe I included a web-based resource for you. So you will be able to see those as well. Some terms that you're not going to see in the text, but maybe throughout the module content are these terms here, right? And it's important for you to be able to make connections by knowing what these mean. Now, going into the lessons, as I mentioned, you have 2 weeks for each module that we're working in, which I try to encourage students to maybe do one lesson 1 week, and then the second week you can work on the other lesson. Now, keep in mind that as you're working through these lessons, you also need to be completing and putting together your presentation, your PowerPoint presentation on your case study child. That's why I said as you're working through these lessons, it's important for you to have your case study child profile pulled up, which I think will be very helpful for you. Now, lesson 3.1 is really looking at causes and classifying the specific disabilities, right? We look at what the term typical and atypical is. How do you play a role in the early childhood as an educator with a student who may have a disability or a developmental delay? What causes these developmental disabilities? And really start getting into how we are classifying and defining. And then we're also going to be looking at young children who are gifted and talented and what role that plays. And lesson 3.2, we are going to put them in those categories I talked about. So now that we know a little bit more about the causes and the different disabilities itself, now where does that child fall? So sensory impairments. What are the supports if you have a child who has sensory impairment? Then we look at physical disabilities, health issues. How do you support them? Learning or behavioral disabilities. How are you going to support them? And be thinking about where your case study child falls if you were going to put them in a group and classify that child in what specific disability category they have. Now, after you go through lesson 3.1 and 3.2, at the very bottom, you're going to see a section where you have your assignments. So you obviously have your module 3 quiz. You have the dates of when it opens and closes. So you can take it whenever you feel like you're prepared and ready. I want us to take a look at the first project work you're going to have with your case study child, which is your disability PowerPoint. So as you begin thinking about your child and you go through the lessons, I want you to think about the purpose of what I'm having you do here. You have to be informed about the disability, the child, their condition. That's why you have those profiles there. You really think about the impact, right, that disability is going to have on that child in this setting. How will they interact with the peers? What supports will be needing to be made later on down the line? So it's important for you to have a good base knowledge. That way, when you continue your work throughout the semester, you will have a good basis of knowledge for that disability itself. So here's the things that you're going to complete. I would rather use PowerPoint, but if you want to use Canva or another presentation tool, that's fine with me. Your purpose is to really just tell all about that case study child's disability and have a good understanding about it. Here are the things that you should include. The first one is you're going to define what that disability is, right? The category. And one of the places I want you to start when you start to do this research is you're going to look under 2 things. You're going to look under the Tennessee State Department of Education, Special Education Eligibility, and their Early Intervention System. Then you're going to look at how is it determined if that child is going to qualify for special ed services, right? So what kind of assessments are done? What do they use from the doctor? Do they have to be diagnosed? All those things I want you to look at. But how specifically does the State Department in Tennessee assess to see if they can get services? Then we're going to look at the cause and prevalence of the disability, right? So what was the cause of this? Was it genetic? Did something happen? Was there an accident? What were the causes? Then we're going to look at their lifespan. specifically the different characteristics you'll see with this disability. And I really want you to hone in and focus on the age that child is now. And then we move into educational considerations. So this would be things like, are you going to have to accommodate them, and in what ways? Are you making modifications? Then you're going to look at your physical changes, your environment. Okay, so do they have access? Those room around the room, be able to move around the room. So these are any really physical changes that you will be thinking about. And then social supports. So when we talk about social supports, we're talking about the emotional social development. So we're looking at the interactions with peers. Is it a warm and welcoming class? How can we encourage the social skills in the classroom, not only between you and that child, but between their peers? Then I want you to look at supports and family support resources specifically that you could give to the family that has to do with that disability. So it could be a support group, meetings they can go to, any kind of pamphlets you can give them. Maybe there's websites where they could go. So think about what kind of resources are available for that family to support them. So one of the things that you will be including in the very last slide that you make and create will be your resources. So I mentioned 2 resources I give you here at the very top. So you will cite those in APA format, which is the Tennessee State Department of Education, Special Education Eligibility, and then you're going to look at the Early Intervention System. So that's 2 right there you're going to cite. But I said I wanted you to have at least 4. You could have more than 4, but you need to have at least 4 resources, which means you're going to have to do a little research. So I want you to think about, you can use the database through your college or through Water State, and think about how you would be able to use that resource. Specifically, trying to figure out all of these things. How do they define it? How is it assessed? What's the causes? Looking at their lifespan. What are some modifications? How do you support them? What are some support groups? All of these things are resources, and you're going to be picking at least 4 and citing them. Now, as far as the format and requirements of the layout, I listed here what I want you to do in the bullet section. The first slide really has to have your name, and it needs to have the name of the case study child and their disability. Fonts, make sure that they're accessible, the colors are not distracting, the background color should be not distracting, and the text has to be easy to read. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I want to make sure you're including images inside your presentation. So you need to have 4 slides minimum, with at least one of them having a graph or chart. So the other 3 can be any kind of images related to your actual disability or your presentation that you think would make sense and fit there. But one of those has to be a graph or chart. But make sure, again, they're related and they support what you're writing and the content inside your presentation. Make sure that it really flows well, it makes sense to the reader. Make sure that you use bullets and headings and it's related to the information so we don't become confused when we look at this. Now, when we talk about specifically accessibility, that means I want you to make sure that the format is right. I do have a separate video that talks about how you make accessibility important ways to create slides. It really talks about how do you, when you're putting something together, create accessibility for all, especially thinking about images. So you can check those out if you have questions. You can also contact me. Now, throughout the semester, I said you're going to work on the project, right? So this project here, as part of the case study overall project, this part is 25 points. I have a rubric here for you that you could look at to see what I'm expecting of you and then how you're going to be graded on your points. So let me go ahead and pull up an example so you can see what I'm talking about. So this is what a student in the past has done. They chose Joey as their case study child. They put the name of it, their name, what the disability was, and that it was a case study. You'll see here that they've included sections that I wanted them to include, right? They included the disability, defined what it was. They even included a picture of him, which helps. Also, they're talking about the findings they had on how they define it, and they look at assessment for these children or this specific child to see if they're eligible for services. So they even put the link there that they use for the Tennessee State Department. Now keep in mind that's fine if you do that, but you also still have to cite it at the end of your presentation in APA format. They listed the steps of the assessment that's taken, so that was really useful. You'll see here they included a graph when they're talking about the causes and prevalence. What are some characteristics? And I like how they included a table. That was very useful. And here's some other things. When they decided to talk about how you support them in the classroom, thinking about accommodations, they really laid it out in a way where you could see the different kinds on one page, but also supporting it with images, which was helpful. They continued that with their environmental adaptations in the classroom, thinking about how you can support them different ways. They included some social supports here, some resources they included that they found for families, and then they included their APA format references. And theirs was 2 pages, because remember, they included a lot of information and they were citing everything they found, because if you're not citing something that you didn't create, then that is going to be plagiarism, which we don't. And a lot of times people don't intentionally plagiarize, but it's important for you to realize that anytime you're using an image that someone else created, or information that was not yours that you created yourself, and you're using it in something that you're completing for a project or an assignment, you have to cite it. So hopefully it was very helpful for you to see kind of an example of something someone has created for a disability PowerPoint. That's all that I have for you. Remember, you have 2 weeks to do it. If you go to table of contents, and you select module 3, if you go to the very bottom, you're going to see the due dates. I had a question about that. The due dates are in there, and the due dates are also in the course calendar schedule that I gave you in the very first Getting Started module. So if you have questions about that, just make sure you're looking at that. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to help. We can have a phone meeting, a virtual meeting. We just have to make sure our schedules line up. Because we're in different time zones, and sometimes that's a little tricky for me. If my office hours ends at 4, that's harder for you. So we have to try to make sure time works for both of us. But please reach out, and I'll be glad to help you any way I can. All right, guys, until next time, take care.